Ağzına gelecek.
Yanağa yapıştır. Evet. Ağza doğru çevirin.
Ben açtım, şarjı var bayağı, değil mi? Bir şey yapar.
Tabii tabii.
Tamam. PDF'i yapmadılar.
Çalışıyor hocam. Ama buraya doğru tuttuğunuzda sıkıntı yaşıyor. Ya da şu anda alıcıyı kapatıyor, çalışıyor, hiçbir şey yok. Benim elimin değmesi gerekiyor.
Gerçekten.
Hello, good morning. My name is Radu Constantinescu, University of Craiova, Romania, and I'm honored to chair this first session from today. And there will be 3 presentations, half an hour each. My proposal would be
Though it's very early session today, but thank you very much. My name is Ozan. I am a nuclear physicist in the Diagnostic Radiology Department of the University of Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. And first of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for the organization committee for their kind invitation to this distinguished event. I'm gonna talk about Monte Carlo simulations today, although I am a nuclear physicist, but I am a staff of the medical diagnostic radiology. So today I will be mostly speaking about the medical applications of the Monte Carlo simulations. I'm sorry. So this is the overview of my presentation today. I'm going to start by the basics of the Monte Carlo simulations. I will go through by the basics and the applications, especially the medical purposes of the Monte Carlo simulations. in our daily clinical practice and for scientific purposes. So in the last slides, I will be presenting some of our publications that we recently published through our own models and through our own modifications within the some human phantoms. Then I will conclude with some future aspects. So let's start by the simulation. Actually, I believe each of us is strongly familiar with the term simulation, and we know what does it mean simulation actually. To simulate something or simulate a model, simulate a system, simulate a human phantom is something that, I mean, we need to discuss about our expectations first. So what really we expect from the simulation? First of all, our expectation is to create an environment that may act or like mimic like a real world. It may be like a human phantom, it may be an experimental design, it may be some of our space designs for the cosmic applications and etc. But it involves some of the simplified models for the sake of success of the experimental studies. Of course, the term simulation has a solid place in different fields such as science, engineering, even economics, medicine, and social sciences when it comes to the social demographic investigations and etc. But when it comes to the physical applications or the physics-based application of the Monte Carlo simulations or generally simulations, so they are really useful just before the experiments, for the optimization studies, for the device design and other related purposes. So let me briefly introduce the type of the simulations. So we have a type that we call as a physical simulation. Another one is computer simulations, and a third one is the Monte Carlo simulations. So the term Monte Carlo comes from the famous place that we call as Monte Carlo, which is really famous with the gambling habits, let's say, right? I will be discussing why we are calling this type of simulations as Monte Carlo. Right, so this type of, as I highlighted over there, this type of simulations use random sampling techniques to model the behavior of the systems that we have a degree of the randomness or uncertainty. So it's a way, definitely it's a way of solving the problems. But of course, it depends what we are looking for. So what is our definition about the problem? So is it an economic problem? It's a medical problem? It's a dose delivery problem? It's a detection problem? So what? So depending on our problem definition, we may create a way to define or to predict the situations that likely to happen through the Monte Carlo simulations. So actually, there is a reason to put here a pair of dice. So to conduct a Monte Carlo simulation, it's like throwing two dice pairs. Let's discuss briefly about it, especially for our young participants here. As we know, each surface of this cube has a different numbers from 1 to 6. If we throw ones, so definitely there will be a certain situation. Let's say 4, 1. So in a case, if you just throw ones, so your overall universe will be consist from the 4, 1. But if you could increase the number of the probabilities by throwing more time, so there will be different type of the situations. Let's say 6, 2, 5, 1, and etc. To run a Monte Carlo simulation is exactly like throwing two dice pair. So as long as you increase the number of the events through your random event generator, so your probability or uncertainty will decrease and the probabilities will increase. So in this way, the simulation code may produce more reliable predictions. That's why I will be discussing in the coming slides, but that's why the computer performance or the overall strength of the random event generator is crucial for us. Of course, there is a huge impact of the Monte Carlo simulations. As I told you, I will be mostly discussing about the medical purposes, but let me overall summarize some crucial impacts or the roles of the Monte Carlo simulation in the radiation studies. Of course, we all know that the radiation is a part of many different fields. They are related, but they are not the same. For example, nuclear physics and medical physics. So the common point over there is of course, ionizing radiation and even the radiation therapy. So this type of simulations can be used, the Monte Carlo simulations, just to act as a real radiation source by defining some different type of the setups. Again, it depends on your simulation, it depends on your problem, what you are looking for. So this is another confusion point. So to say, I know the Monte Carlo simulation is really not logical. But the more logical statement about the knowledge on Monte Carlo is to say, I can apply the Monte Carlo simulation in this type of problems. Because it's an ocean, right? It's an ocean. So we are just swimming in a small river of this ocean. This is another human phantom, as you see. This is from our publication. I will be showing this publication, what was the purpose and how we designed this human phantom. So again, when it comes to the radiation sciences, our expectation is not to receive a certain result, but to receive a prediction or prediction rate, or let's say an overall result that we call as informed decisions. So there is neither Monte Carlo code nor any other program to give an exact results when it comes to the radiation transport. But this type of codes, also I would like to say, it depends on the strength of the code. Not all the Monte Carlo simulations has the same power or the reliability, but depending on the quality of your code that you are using, so you may improve the situations that you are expecting from the code likely to happen. Okay, let's have a closer look on the medical applications. So those are some of the medical applications. For example, dose planning and radiation therapy. It's quite crucial. As we all know, the Monte Carlo simulations are a part of, and it's like the biggest pillar even in the medical physicist who is working with the radiation therapy. Of course, we have some justifications to use Monte Carlo simulations in the radiation therapy. First of all, the microdosimetry within the body, it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible. But in the same time, we have a great concern about the dose delivery. For example, imagine that there is a cancer tissue, but you have to deliver the external source or the dose amount in the most successful way. So in this case, you have to optimize some of the input parameters. For example, the direction of the external radiation source, the amount of the radiation dose, right? So the thickness of the patient's body, because it has an impact on the attenuation of the external radiation, and etc., etc. I may increase this list, by the way. We have different type of the concerns, but when it comes to the dose delivery through the Monte Carlo radiations, so we have a huge justification. So those assessment studies in the organ and tissues, this is one of our ongoing studies or ongoing projects. I will be demonstrating some of our initial publications today. Drug development and pharmacokinetics and medical imaging and image reconstruction. Okay, of course, it's not a pink frame, so we can't say this type of simulation methods, they have pure advantage or they are 100% useful. In fact, no, it has also its own disadvantage. For example, computational intensity is important for the sake of simulation efficiency, resource requirements, of course, you may conduct a Monte Carlo simulation through your personal laptops, right? You are free to use. But we have to discuss about the overall performance again, about the strength or the durability of this random event generator. So usually what we do, we use the high-end workstations or the cloud systems nowadays. But again, for the initial or the input checks, you are free to use your personal laptops, but you can't expect that much high run or track times through your laptops. You may burn your processor, and the consequence will be not so positive then, right? Modeling simplifications, let's talk about the body, right? It's one of the most complex systems that we ever know. But in the same time, we have a strong motivation to design a human phantom. So now the question, in which level we could simplify a human body, right? You are free to elaborate, right? You are free to elaborate from a small detail in your skin till the shape of your lung. Of course, you are free. But each geometry modification or each variation in your input will take time, and there will be sort of difficulties in terms of modeling simplification. Validation and benchmarking, it's, for me, I believe it's the most important stage of any medical application through the radiation studies. You have to validate your results. When it comes to the radiation studies, for example, the best way, let's talk about a shielding or shield material. Of course, we may design the same setup through the Monte Carlo simulations, but in the same time, we can design the setup in an experimental condition. So the best scenario is to validate the results each other and to conduct a benchmarking phase. The last one is, user expertise. Of course, each code has more or less different language. We can't classify the application of the Monte Carlo simulations from one point of view. This is impossible. But user expertise, especially with the similar language, is also crucial for us. This is an overall flow of a typical Monte Carlo simulations. So the modeling phase, writing code phase, phantom or setup design, it's up to you what you are working on, it's totally up to you. And transfer all of these gainings or the achievements into your applications. I just put here the term diagnostic radiology, but you may put as nuclear physics or like a material science and etc. But what I'm trying to say here, you must transfer all of these achievements or the 4 different achievements within those 4 different phases into this last stage. This is a challenge. This is a challenge. Sometimes we design the setup, we observe the setup, right? But writing the input or to find the most proper geometry for your intended definition may be a challenge for a user or a user as a beginner, but either in this way or that way, you have to transfer your overall achievements into the application directly. So there is a popular question, especially for the beginners. So even I am receiving tens of mails every week through the ResearchGate, through the personal mail. So we came across with your publications. Our question is that what is the best Monte Carlo code? So this is very logical in the same time, but a very difficult question. Why? Because there is no clear answer for this question. Definitely, there is no answer for this question. There is no best code. Of course, we may criticize their reliability. We may criticize their user friendliness. But each code has its own strengths and weaknesses. Experience is important. There are some codes that have similar input writing styles. But for example, let me talk about my own code that I'm using now. It's about 16 years. It's MCMP, which is based on the US Los Alamos lab. It has a totally different language, but there is another fantastic code that we call as GIANT4, right? From the CERN and Italy. Actually, they observed the data from those two places. Both of them had some weaknesses and strengths, but the language is totally different between those two strong codes. Energy range of your interest, this is another point of concern that we should think about it, right? So nobody can compare two radiation transportation studies between a diagnostic radiology, where we work between the 80 to 120 kV, but in the same time, we have different type of accelerator-based studies that we may simulate the setup. Of course, we are talking about MEVs, GEVs, and etc. So there is a huge difference between the energy range. Since each code is obtaining the physics list and the databases from different centers, such as Stanford, such as CERN, some particle accelerator centers in Italy, and etc. So you have to think about your intended application and the libraries. So in conclusion, you guys, especially the beginners or the young students, if you are going to start use a Monte Carlo simulation in the future, first of all, you have to decide about your intended application. Then you may come with a conclusion about the answer of the question, what is the best code? So I call them as an all-star team, by the way. Yes, indeed, they are the all-star team of the Monte Carlo simulation. So I just give a privilege here, sorry. I just put my code into the first row, right, MCMP, but I also have sort of experience, just sort of experience with the GIANT4. In the same time, another strong code is LUCA, right? EGS from the Canada collaboration. Nowadays, the popularity of the PIST, right, is increasing in a daily basis. Just I believe the Japan Nuclear Energy Society just released this code, and it's a really user-friendly code. I strongly recommend you to just check the abilities of this code. And the Topaz, Penelope, and Gate, those two codes are the subcode of GIANT4. They are purely dedicated for the medical applications, more or less, thanks to their intended energy range that I recently mentioned about it. Okay, why should we simulate? So let's discuss about another justification points, why we should simulate a phantom or a patient or a dose delivery study. So of course, working with radiation is not always possible. We may criticize about the financial resources, also legal issues, some of the authorities, restrictions, bylaws, and etc. So to license your lab is not an easy task, especially in some countries that are strongly linked to the IAEA, because each of their application or decision is being monitored by the IAEA. So they are quite careful. So that's why it's possible, but not always possible. What about the harms, right? So you may design a radiation source and you may track your source through your computational environment. Definitely there is no harm risk. But when it comes to the experimental studies, so there is always a risk to be considered. Ethical issues, cost, trial and errors. For me, the strongest justification for the medical applications through the Monte Carlo simulations is microdosimetry. For example, there is a shining star of the oncologic departments within the last 10-15 years, which is brachytherapy. It's like a treatment method by seeding the radioactive sources into some tissues or the skins, especially in the cavitary structures, such as cervix cancer and etc. Organ tissue dose and the dose delivery studies. Treatment planning, again, the main pillar of the radiotherapy applications. You may see here the dose distribution, that the data perhaps obtained from the Monte Carlo simulation. A typical LINAC, of course, to design the device 100%, it's almost impossible. At least it will take your time. But if you know what you are looking for, so perhaps you may define the basic structures that may provide you the expected results. Here you can see the head of the LINAC and the rings, and perhaps there will be a structure or patient phantom. It's less known than, comparing to radiation therapy, so we know there is a huge or the big space for the diagnostic radiology applications through the Monte Carlo simulations, but the application area is not that much wide as radiation therapy. But of course, we are able to obtain some of the radiological images through the Monte Carlo simulations. As you can see, there is a clear radiological image that is obtained through simulation. Fortunately, each of this structure provided different type of the attenuations, and this is our expectation. Actually, this is what we are expecting from the diagnostic applications, to see or to reflect these density differences into our imaging receptor. So there is no imaging receptor, by the way. So we obtain those images just with some telemeshes, which can provide us some of the basic outputs. Those are some application areas such as image quality, patient dose estimation, virtual phantom development, etc., etc. So let me discuss about some of our applications. This is one of our recent applications, that we published this year. So what we have done, let me briefly describe. Actually, in the University of Sharjah, we have two different labs. So in one of those labs, we just conducted some type of experiments through a physical phantom. Our concern was to see what is the protective side or the protective efficiency of the breast and the eye shielding during the cervicospinal investigation or examination. So of course, our phantom has 4 or 5 different holes, which means we are just able to insert maximum 5 or 4 different detectors. In the same time, it means that at the end of the experiment, it will enable us to see 4 different locations and their dose distribution. So, but of course, there are different type of the organs, there are different type of the tissues to be considered, especially when it comes to radiation risk assessment. So we just validated our experimental design through our MIRD phantom. I modified this phantom. I just put some shields here, some windows here, some of the shields here, and we validated our experimental findings through our Monte Carlo simulations. Once we observed that the obtained results are almost 97% same, so we pushed forward through the real experiment, and we just exported this type of organs and tissues. And of course, through the experimental studies, we were only able to see 4 or 5 different locations or the points about the dose distribution, but thanks to Monte Carlo simulation, we observed different type of the very critical tissues and the organs even. This is another application, also very recent project. We may elaborate in the coming days more, but this was an interesting study. I came across with a publication. It has been published from a group in the Taiwan. So what they did for the breast screening examinations, they just put here a protective layer, which is lead acrylic, I believe, as far as I remember, it was lead acrylic. So since we are also working with the glass shields, so my question mark was to see the protectivity or to compare our glass shields with those lead, because this it contains the lead. It's definitely we want to prevent our patients at least the interactions with the skin. So again, I just designed the same phantom as a thoracic wall and the breast. So I further elaborated this breast model. This is one of the most up-to-date breast model in the literature, which has 3 different layers. Because in some publications, they recommend to define the breast structure as a 50% adipose, 50% glandular tissue. But within this 3-layer structure, each layer has different adipose and the glandular tissue amount. So we did it, left and right breast, we put the same protective layer here as they did in the experimental study, and we compared the protectivity of this lead and some glass shields that we produced in our own labs. So we had some successful results we achieved and we published. The project is ongoing, by the way. We may publish some more within the same concept, because we are really wondering about the protectivity of our glass shields that we produced. But of course, to perform this experimental shape, we may conduct it in the future, but at the beginning, since we validated our findings with the experimental study, it's okay to use and to conduct this type of simulation. So let me conclude with some future expectations of the Monte Carlo simulations in the medicine. Definitely, there is a brilliant future for the Monte Carlo simulations, because I believe the Monte Carlo simulations is a part of AI. And the AI, especially nowadays in the medicine, in the diagnostic radiology, it's like a shining star, right? Everybody talks about the AI, how to conduct AI, how it will affect the daily practice of the radiologist and or the medical physicist or the decision-making process. But for me, in the future, the abilities of the Monte Carlo simulations will be further incorporated into the abilities of AI, and as you can see, there will be some machine learning and AI collaborations with the Monte Carlo simulations. That's what the developers nowadays in the big labs working on. Enhanced patient-specific simulations, advanced imaging modalities, real-time simulations during the screening or the therapy. There will be perhaps some codes that will allow us to define, design, and to observe the results through the real-time applications, and of course, therapeutic applications will even improve its abilities in the future. Thank you very much. I tried to shortcut. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate. If there is a question, Mr. Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your very, very interesting presentation. Questions, please, comments. I would have a question.
Sure.
I know that very important in radiation, in radiotherapy, it's to take into consideration the individual factor, the personal, each patient has in Monte Carlo simulations, there is a parameter modeling taking somehow into consideration the personal behavior of the because it's clear that tumor is not.
I got your point. So actually, the point that you mentioned is one of the future expectations. So in the future, perhaps there will be more flexible codes to design and define the patient-specific inputs. But at the moment, to be honest, we are trying to go through some standard phantoms that it's already classified as the pediatric, adult, and obese. Of course, male and female.
Okay.
But unless there is no extraordinary situation with the intended application, so we try to go with the standard and predefined codes. Of course, as I showed, we may further modify depending on our investigation. But if we are talking about the patient size or the patient structure, there are some standard phantoms.
Yes, I told you that because there are some mathematical models that take into consideration these individual factors, and we can discuss after if you want.
Sure.
Okay, another question if there are.